It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It is the Take Command podcast. Logan Paulsen there, Craig Hoffman here. And it's time to talk about Commanders and Bears. And this was supposed to be, and still might be, the Jayden Daniels versus Caleb Williams showdown of headlines. Woohoo, cool, number one versus number two pick. But this is two teams, Logan, both kind of on the ascent. Chicago's been playing a lot better. They've also done it against some bad opponents. Washington's obviously 5-2. They've beaten up on some bad teams as well because there's a lot of bad teams, something we talked about on Tuesday. But you play who's in front of you. Both teams playing really well. Chicago's coming off the bye. And the big story coming into it is, are we going to get that matchup of Jayden versus Caleb? We know Williams will play, but Logan, it's too early. For those that don't know, we record this on Thursday morning, so it's like 8:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning. We don't know what Jayden's practice status is going to be for the practice later today. We don't know what his status is going to be for Sunday. We might not know until Sunday. But when you hear Dan Quinn talk about, oh, this is ultimately going to be my decision, obviously we know that it's not wholly his decision. There's going to be doctors, and I'm sure Adam Peters has a thought, all that stuff going in. What would you be looking for if you're Dan to make sure that Jayden Daniels can go out and play? And, how much are you considering the fact that this guy's the franchise for, if we want to oversimplify it just a little bit, but really honestly not by much?
Yeah, and I think it's good that Dan said that. I think it's good that he said that it's his decision. And why is that good? I mean, there's so many times where as a player, and this, coaching people and being around athletes, they're going to play. And Jayden is crazy competitive. You see it at practice, you see it in training camp, you see him on the sideline that way. And so it's good, I think, that Dan's basically saying, I'm going to take it out of his hands and I'm going to make the decision based on my observations, based on, based on what the doctor tells me. I had an injury when I was in Atlanta. I had a grade 2 MCL tear. And basically Dan told me the first week of practice, I was like, I'm going to play. And he was like, no, I don't think you're going to play. And then went through another week of practice and he was like, I think you're ready this week. And I didn't feel 100%, but I think he felt comfortable enough with how I was moving around and how I was practicing that I could participate. And so there is some level of kind of liberation for the athlete when the coach says that. So I think that's pretty cool, first off. Second off, from my general, they haven't said anything specifically, for my general understanding of the injury, it's going to be whether or not, he can throw, whether or not he can run, how he moves around. This is not a long-term thing. This is not, I think people are oh, this is the Robert Griffin all over again. It's definitely not in the same category as that. So, whether he plays this week or not, he'll be playing next week or the week after. This is not going to be a long-term issue. I think it's just about what's best for the athlete. And so for me, if I'm the head coach, if I'm putting myself in Dan Quinn's shoes, I'm thinking about Jayden 100%. As I think Marcus has done a good job. I think he's shown he's a serviceable backup, and you can get through a game, get through two games. And that's why ultimately, as a backup quarterback, or what you're looking for in a backup quarterback, that's what you want. A guy that can win you 3 or 4 games in a pinch and keep you on schedule. And I think Marcus showed last week that he can do that. So to me, there's not a lot of, it's binary. It's can he do it? Yes. Can he do it? No.
Right.
If he can't do it, we're okay. And it's disappointing for fans, I think. I was so looking forward to this matchup against a good defense, how well Jayden's been playing. I just want to see him play every week because I'm a fan of him. I'm a fan of his play style. I'm a fan of what he brings for the city and for the offense. But ultimately, if you can't do it, you can't do it. So, that's, I think, good that Dan said it that way, and kudos to the staff. And I know that they're going to make the best decision for the organization because, like you said last week, everything they've done is so deliberate. It's so long-term vision. They're not going to rush him back for a Bears game in the middle of the season.
Right. Sorry, Tony Romo. Sorry, Jim Nantz. You might not get your sorry, CBS executives. You might not get the whole reason you moved this game to the game of the week. We would like you to have many other games of the week featuring us moving forward. And that's the other just quick thing that I'll add on this from the injury side of it is, what you don't want is it to become a nagging thing that pops up every couple of weeks and he makes a throw and you're like, my ribs. You don't want this to become a thing. So you have to let it heal all the way. Because there is, from what our best guess is, again, none of us know the injury because they won't tell us.
Which is good too. I think it's also smart. Because from a game, because if they can know it, but if we don't know it and the media doesn't know it, they can kind of play a little bit of gamesmanship here. So I think that's another thing. Kudos to them. I remember Mike Shanahan You see the same thing. It does give you a competitive advantage. As annoying that is for fans, annoying that is for people who want to place bets on the game, it gives the team a competitive advantage. And I love how they're kind of doing everything they can to make sure that they have those advantages.
Yeah. I love Dan. He always answers with a smile on his face. Yeah, well, I can tell you this, this, and this. It's like, you didn't answer the question. Well, can you tell us more? And I can tell you this, this, and this.
Yeah, right.
He's very good at it, doing it with a smile. But for everything that we can kind of take out of it, like, it doesn't sound like it's a broken rib. It's something with the cartilage or whatever, because they said like, oh, it's not a contact thing. Like, they're more concerned about him moving around. That does probably mean that moving around risks aggravating it. And so what you don't want is him to play when it's close and then he aggravates it and then he misses another 2 weeks. Like, cool, you got 2.5 quarters, but now you missed 2 weeks. So you'd rather just miss 1 week and know that it's good by next week, as much as it sucks that we want to see him this weekend. There's that. So that then begs the question, if he cannot go, what changes come to the offense based off either things that Marcus Mariota likes versus the things that Jayden Daniels likes, the things that they don't like, and just I'm going to use the word drop off because otherwise Marcus would be the starter, the drop off from Jayden to Marcus? Like, what changes in this offense in terms of how it's called, how it's designed, or just how it functions with the backup under center?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is I'd probably just B-Rob, Austin Eckler, or Jeremy McNichols, the offensive line. I'd really lean into that group. And they've done a great job throughout the season. I think it's a group that's shown you can lean on them. And I think with the right schematic elevation, like we talked about in the podcast on Tuesday, we're insulating runs, we're putting window dressing on certain runs, we're getting the runs in different formations, we're spreading guys out to run downhill, like all that stuff. I'm leaning into that 100%. I'm also leaning into the quarterback run stuff, and not because I think it's going to be like overly effective or anything like that. I just think it helps kind of settle him in. Like when you watch him in Atlanta, when you watch him in Tennessee, he's a guy that, I think takes a little bit of time to kind of get in the flow of the game. And that's just an easy way for him to like get on base, like kind of get in the tempo, get in the speed of the game. So I'd probably look for something like that early. And the other thing I noticed just in watching the game and kind of comparing it to what they did in Atlanta, he's not a super like on rhythm thrower. And like, it's kind of it's a really interesting juxtaposition to Jayden, who's very on rhythm, very on time, like really high levels of anticipation. It's not like that. So I'm kind of thinking of throws where, as Kliff Kingsbury, I can create a lot of space for him to kind of see throws. And kind of looking back and watching the film, like that's what they did. They didn't like lean into quick game, which is kind of what your default setting would be if you're trying to get a quarterback easy throws. You're like, let's get into quick game. Let's get into stuff where he can just get the ball out quick and run some. It's not that. It's kind of these deeper, longer developing play action shots. And those play action shots, I think, are so important because they create grass for him. And again, that if you're going to do that, you got to think about when I'm going to do that, like situation in the game, how I'm going to protect it. And that's something that I think Kliff's done a great job of this season. So as opposed to saying, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, the thing is too, on those play action shots, like the vertical route often isn't open because teams cover it. And it's like, oh God, that guy's going deep. But when you talk about the grass that it opens up, it then becomes the easy throws underneath it. And a lot of times you can get that high cross intermediate stuff where it's like really, really easy to see because all the deeper defenders have gone with some kind of vertical route, or just the easy, if you want easy checkdowns underneath. I just wanted to kind of, unlayer one more layer of the onion there for folks on how that creates the space, because like just sending everybody deep isn't the answer. It's what you do underneath it that then creates the easy throws for a guy like Mariota to really be able to see it. And those tend to be wide open. And although not maybe 50-yard touchdowns, you can get 10, 15 yards pretty easily on some of those plays if the blocking holds up.
Yeah, and I think that's a really nice way to articulate it. You're not taking you're not trying to hit a post. You're trying to hit the crosser basically, or the big out, or Zach Ertz over the middle of the field, kind of crossing into that window because you've cleared it out. So I think that's what I'd kind of expect to see, which is I think he did one of the reasons he did so well. I think the other thing that I'd like to see Kliff do, and he's done it with every quarterback he's ever had, is get into those 3x1s, find those isolations. Those are really easy reads and really easy decisions for the quarterback, especially when you got a guy like Terry who's good at running hitches. He's good at running comebacks. Terry doesn't have the most diverse route tree of all time, but he's really good at those. So I'm going to lean into those and just make sure he's feeling comfortable and gets on base. But I think because he's a little bit of out of rhythm thrower, or that's what he showed last game. I mean, that's what he showed when he was in Atlanta too. what is my protection plan? I think is going to be the big thing for him, especially with the Bears. And it's good this week because the Bears aren't, we'll talk about them more in a second, more specifically, but they don't bring a ton of pressure. They're kind of like, in some ways, they're kind of a vanilla defense. They're like, we're going to win with 4. Sometimes we'll bring 5 if the situation dictates, but it's not like when you watch Minnesota where you're like, what are they doing? There's so many rushers. This is simulated pressures. Like there's just so much going on. They're not like that. So in terms of protection plan, I think Kliff will be able to come up with a good one. And I think, again, you don't want to leverage these kind of down the field throws too much. And so that's where I think the running game is going to be really nice to insulate him. But again, like, to Mariota's credit, this is a style very similar to the offense that he ran when he was at Oregon. He does seem very comfortable with it. He's very comfortable with kind of the number counts, the quarterback run stuff. So I think there will be a drop off, but I think Kliff, if he calls a good game, which he's done throughout the year, can really insulate him. So.
For sure. Just to wrap up on Marcus, and then I do want to talk a little bit more, obviously, about the Chicago defense specifically, but also why they've given up a ton of big runs this year, because that could be huge in this game. The thing that concerns me with the drop-off is I've now had to answer this question multiple times on a couple of different things, and I've been borrowing a word from you, Logan. Jayden is so fastidious with the football.
Fastidious.
He has protected the football so well this year, and Marcus has had some spurts in his career where that has not been the case, and the Bears are a very, very good team at forcing turnovers. They have a ton of interceptions this year. They've got some fumbles. Like they might be vanilla, but they will get after you. Yeah. And the Commanders probably are not going to win this game if they lose the turnover battle. And so can Marcus protect the football in the way that Jayden has protected the football, even if that means Tressway has his busiest day of the year so far, as he's had a famously low number of punts this season? That's fine, but it's kind of one of those games where every series needs to end with a kick. And if you can do that and then steal 1 or 2 off of Caleb the other way, then you're in business in this game, even if you don't have the big explosive stuff that you might get from Jayden. But I do think that the running game can have some big explosive plays. I was watching one of the things I do when I watch tape on an opponent, which again is getting harder and harder by the week. Apparently they keep playing games around the rest of the league too, Logan. It's like, man, there's a lot of film here. This was easy in week 2. But you're watching, I watch all the times that teams have scored on a team. Like, where are the touchdowns coming from? And for some teams, it's like, run from the 2, run from the 2, run from the 1, run from the 4. And it's like, okay, you kind of have to drive it on this team. The Bears have given up 3 or 4, at least, big, like 38, 32, 31-yard touchdown runs this year. How are teams able to get them in the run game with the big explosives? And if you're Kliff Kingsbury, how excited are you by the fact that other teams have already done the thing that you strive to do week in and week out?
Yeah, and so when you watch the Bears, like I do it a little bit differently. I watch all the first downs, then I watch usually first and second down, then I watch all the third downs and kind of go through it like that, just to kind of get a feel for tendency, right? Like what they want to be doing on first down.
That's where I start too, but eventually I'm like, let's get to the fun stuff. You know?
It is more fun to watch touchdowns for sure. And I think the thing I left with is they want to play cover 3 a lot, or single high safety, whether, whatever it is, whether it's man, cover 3, whether it's like man lurk, man plug, whatever it is, they're in some type of single high structure. And there's 8 guys in the box. Like Jaquan Brisker for them is very, very good. He's very physical. He's downhill. He plays with good energy. He's a lot of fun to watch. And so when you're playing 8-man box, like, it should be really hard to run the football. Like, think old Seattle cover 3. Like, that's why they ran that structure, is to basically, like, you're not going to run the football anymore. And so I was surprised that there's all these kind of explosive runs against them. And when you watch the explosive runs, I think the thing that jumps out to me is, while they're in an 8-man box, they are a very fast and aggressive defense, and they do get a little bit undisciplined is probably the wrong word, but they do get out of gaps. So, for example, there was a run that the Panthers ran where it was like, I think it was an explosive touchdown run. I don't know if it was a touchdown, but maybe they were down at like the 2-yard line. It was a 50-yard run. And there's like a little jet sweep action. The quarterback boots out. The 3 technique gap releases. Jaquan Brisker is supposed to fit off of that, but he plays the jet sweep. And there's a lane that's absolutely gigantic. So I think they just don't have great eye discipline all the time. And it shows up in these explosive runs because you're in that structure to stop the run. And so when they don't do it, you're like, oh, they're just not doing what they're supposed to do. And you see why. And again, their kind of best asset is that they're fast to the football. but it's also something you can use against them. And teams have exploited that. Like the Panthers absolutely got after them in the run game. And again, they have a really good interior. They're very physical up front, like we talked about when we were previewing Carolina. But I was surprised how efficient their run game was. And again, they lose that game for exactly the point you're talking about. Andy Dalton throws 2 picks, and I think they lost 2 fumbles in that game to Chicago. So the ball is life for Chicago big time. But in terms of running the football, I think it fits really, really well, at least in that game and against Jacksonville. Jacksonville's a little bit different. Their explosive runs come predominantly off of like quarterback reads, scrambles. There's a couple that Swift has that are explosive runs. I'm talking about Chicago's offense now, but for Jacksonville, obviously same type of thing. Just a little bit of window dressing, a little bit of number count, you'll be okay. But I do think that it fits with what Kliff and what this offense has done throughout the year, where it's like, hey, a little bit of window dressing, number counts, let's take advantage of it. So I do think that's going to be a huge feature in this game, no doubt.
Yeah. So looking at some of the statistical side of this. Also, by the way, just real quick before I forget, the 38-yard Chuba Hubbard run that for the touchdown on Chicago or against Chicago by Carolina. Did you see Robert Hunt on that play?
No. What happened?
It was like a GT pull, and Hunt goes, pulls, hits his block. And then he starts like shoulder shimmy dancing as Hubbard gets to like the 20-yard line because he's like, oh, it got out. It's worked. Yeah. I just have never seen an offensive lineman start dancing that early. So that was fun. If you want some really fun one, go watch the long Chuba Hubbard touchdown run on the all-22 end zone angle. Anyway, look at some of the stats on Chicago's run defense. They are actually right next to Washington. In a lot of statistical categories. They are now the 12th best in the league EPA per rush. But one thing that I think is interesting is they have a fairly low stuff percentage, which we've talked about a little bit this year. They have the 9th lowest stuff percentage in the league. And the reason I think that's important is like you're not necessarily at huge risk of getting in 2nd and 12. Right. If you run the football, can you at least get 2-3 yards out of it and stay on good down and distance, which I think is going to be really important with Mariota, because the idea of him having to drop back and just play, super high leveraged quarterback is not where he's going to shine. So I think that is something that is encouraging against the Bears defense. That is one of the best in the league. They are also, I'd imagine, I haven't looked at the red zone numbers. They've got to be outstanding in the red zone because they are giving up like 16 points per game. They're one of the best in the league in terms of scoring, which ultimately is the whole point of defense. And they also have not given up over 21 points in 12 straight games. So you might be able to get some explosive runs. You might be able to get this, get that. But the reason that they are tremendous in terms of scoring is they are one of the top 3-4 in almost every statistical category against the pass. Yeah. They are really hard to pass against. And I'm guessing that has to do with the talent in their secondary, as well as a couple of good pass rushers and actually a pretty solid second level as well.
Yeah, and this is one of those things too where I think they've got the benefit of scheduling a little bit, and you got to play and take the test that's given to you. But they got the Tennessee Titans week 1. They got the Texans, obviously, that's a very prolific offense. And I think they gave up 35 points in that game, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And then they got the Colts with Anthony Richardson, and that game was tough to watch, man. No one wanted to win. They're throwing picks. We're not being careful with the football. Just not very good offense in general. The Rams are banged up. They got them week 4. The Panthers, who we just saw, and we just talked about how rough they can be offensively. And then the Jacksonville Jaguars, who, again, in that game in London, were just not very efficient offensively. So it's funny, when you watch some of the cut-ups, some the completion cut-ups, there's space and there's air in the defense. I think it's just about can you maximize can you be effective? Can you maximize? Because they're talented, but there's nobody that's you're like, oh my God, this guy. There's no Sauce Gardner in the secondary.
I was gonna say Jalen Johnson's kind of emerged as one of those guys.
He's a good player.
He might be a top 5 corner in the league at this point. He's been awesome.
Again, good players, but I also think there's some context to the numbers they have, to their defensive efficiency numbers in terms of scoring. And, we're coming in and our starting quarterback may or may not play. But if you can kind of protect the football, run the ball, hit some explosive plays, I know that's kind of day one offensive stuff. They're not – there's sometimes when you watch a defense and you're like, I don't know how we're going to put up points. And this is a good group. They're a physical group. They run hard. They've got a bunch of athletes. I think when you look at their depth chart, they've got good linebackers. TJ Edwards, a guy they paid a lot of money to in free agency, a linebacker. They got Tremaine Edmonds. They brought him in from Buffalo. Montez Sweat. Gervin Dexter's their sack leader at defensive tackle. They've got players. I'm not saying they don't have players.
Yeah.
It's just there's sometimes like when you used to watch like Baltimore, back in the day, or San Francisco, like back in 2013, 14, when they had Patrick Willis at linebacker, you're just like, what are we going to do? And that's not exactly how you feel about this group. So I think they're good. I think they're slightly inflated by the offensive talent that they've seen so far this year.
Sure. All right. So at the end of the day, like if you're Kliff and you're managing Marcus, what's like your final word to him as you send him out there? Hey man, go get him. And remember,
yeah, this is always tough. Like when you're talking to a quarterback, and it's like anytime you're coaching anybody, it's tough because sometimes you say, "Hey, let's make sure we protect the football," and then they're thinking about it too much and they play too conservative. So,
hey man, go let it rip.
Yeah, so I'd probably say something like that. I was like, "Hey man, we trust you. Make a decision. Let's get after it." And then it's my job as a quarterback coach or as the offensive coordinator, to make sure that I don't put him in bad spots, right? Like we just talked about, what is my protection plan? And the other thing is, like, if we're efficient on first and second down, he's not going to be in these crazy high leverage third downs. Like sometimes like when you're watching another team's offense, like Carolina is a really good example of this. When they're not efficient on first and second down, they're in 3rd and 10, and everyone's like, "Oh, Andy Dalton, he's struggling, whatever." But that 3rd and 10 is like the most high leverage passing situation. You're going to get a great rush. You're going to get a great pressure. They're going to be awesome in coverage in the back end, and you're going to have to deal. So what is my plan on first and second down to limit the exposure to that in those tough passing downs? And one of the things about this offense so far this year is it's been excellent. It's really been excellent about staying out of those situations. And a lot of that, I give credit to Jayden Daniels because he just makes excellent decisions. But as Kliff, can I help facilitate that a little bit to his skill set like we talked about? More quarterback runs, potentially, more kind of screens, quick game. Kliff loves that stuff. They've been excellent at executing that all year. And then when we've got to have those big chunk plays, can we do it from a 3rd and 4 as opposed to a 3rd and 10 or 3rd and 8 where it's a little bit more obvious passing down?
One thing that I will say for both coordinators, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we flip sides of the ball here, is when they have gone against coordinators that are kind of predictable, they can really get on one. They can get on heaters as play callers. Joe has done that sometimes this year when he figures out an offense's rhythm, like he's on it. And Kliff, I think the same. And so the fact that this defense is vanilla could be something where Kliff sets up, Marcus really nicely for success, but also Chicago is vanilla because they're good enough to get away with being vanilla in a lot of ways. So you still got to go out and execute. Other last thing real quick is they've got some nice speed on the edge in terms like Montez specifically. I think folks are fairly familiar with his stylings. So I do wonder the quarterback run game, what kind of wrinkles they have to not let him play both on the basic zone read stuff, because he's one of the few defensive ends in the league that can get away with playing both. And so how do they do that to try to keep that a part of the plan? Because obviously running Marcus, if you're not running him, like you're not maximizing him, you're not even close. So that's another like specific wrinkle that I'm kind of thinking about going into this one.
And I think Marcus is excellent at it. Excellent at it in terms of he makes good decisions, but he's also great with the ball in a way that a lot of quarterbacks aren't. So, like when I remember watching, again, obviously when this team, when the Commanders played Atlanta last year and he was the quarterback, just his ability on the zone read to just extend that fake and put that defensive end in just a little bit more conflict. And so you can tell, like, obviously the Commanders knew what they were going to do, and they coached him up to kind of surf the handoff, play that surf technique. But because the handoff's so long, guys would they'd get kind of in bad spots. So I think that's another thing he just does a great job of. And you mentioned the simplicity of the Bears defense, and it is true. Like first down, they're going to be in some type of single high usually, and then on second and third down, or second and long, third and long, they're going to be in some type of split safety structure, Tampa 2. Some type of cover 2, maybe quarters. And you can as an offensive coordinator, that's great. The problem is, like, they know when they play a defense a lot, they play a lot of cover 3, they play a lot of cover 2, they know where the soft spots are. So they're going to be really acutely aware of the stuff that hurts them. And as a result, they're able to cover it up. So it's going to be a really interesting chess match between Kliff and their defensive coordinator in terms of what they can do to kind of maximize each side of the football. And in Kliff's case, if Marcus does play, how do you maximize Marcus?
Take command. That's Logan Paulson. I am Craig Hoffman. Let's take a look at the Bears offense now as the Commanders defense prepares to try to build on their best performance of the season so far. Gave up, of course, just 7 to the Carolina Panthers. And this is a Bears offense that is very, very interesting, Logan, to watch because they have definitely evolved throughout the year. They found ways to get more and more out of Caleb Williams. They've also got some fun creative stuff that they've scored on this year. So they will put you in a bind. But on a more basic down in, down out level, how have they adapted their offense to start to get more and more out of their number 1 overall pick in Caleb Williams?
Yeah, Shane Waldron's obviously an interesting guy because he comes from like the West Coast, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay. I think he was here for a little bit. I don't remember what year, or maybe I was with him in Atlanta, but he's a really smart coach. And I think you see a lot of the influences of that kind of West Coast, the Kyle Shanahan West Coast approach, right? They get in tight formations sometimes. They run the ball from tight formations. They throw the ball from tight formations. A little bit less play action than kind of what I was expecting and watching, but I think that's probably speaking to Caleb Williams. They do it. They do run keepers. They do run play action pass, but it's not like what they want. It doesn't seem like what they want to be doing. And I'm assuming that's because of Caleb Williams, right? So, instead, so for example, on first, second down, you're going to see run, you're going to see some keeper stuff, right? But they also do a lot of empty and a lot of quick game too. It's interesting. Like they'll run on first down, second down, they'll get into empty, they'll spread you out and kind of play like pick your best matchup and let them deal from that spot. So I do think that's maybe one thing that I'd point to in terms of how they're maximizing him. Also, they especially against Jacksonville, kind of leaned into the quarterback designed run game. And it's not like they're going to run quarterback power with him, but they're going to get in they're going to spread you out. They're going to get in a 3-by-1. They're going to have the back off set. They're going to read it, and he's going to run it, and he can throw it kind of in that NFL modern triple option. They ran the heck out of that at USC. So there are elements of kind of bringing in features of stuff that he's done before that I think are really good and effective. And also, like, this is one thing I noticed too, is they do have kind of, I don't know how to say this because without it sounding like pejorative, but like kind of these easier kind of college-y type reads where it's like, hey, it looks like we're throwing a bubble, but it's actually a stalk and a slant. So it's like getting to like a normal West Coast like slant flat concept, but we're just going to put a little bit of window dressing on it. So it's not like a gimmick because that's good offensive football. You found a way to kind of maximize that read for the quarterback, but that shows up every once in a while too. And I think it's good football. And so it's not, I think Waldron's doing a good job with that. So that's a compliment. But in terms of like kind of the design of the play, it might be something you'd see in college a little bit more. So it does have the West Coast, like first and second down, we're going to run the ball. We're going to try and establish the run so we can set up play pass. There's an element of that, but there is also this element of like the spread. And I think it's really interesting watching how they kind of have blended the two offenses together in a kind of seamless way, because it doesn't feel like sometimes when you're watching teams that are kind of trying new things out, it feels like this is this guy's idea and this is this guy's idea, but it kind of fits well and it doesn't throw you off too bad. And they can do stuff from different personnel groupings because of the tremendous skill players they have. So it's kind of a fun offense to watch. And I think it is week on week growing and evolving. And I think that's one of the reasons why Caleb is also developing. And again, it also needs to be pointed out, they haven't played like these defensive juggernauts the past couple of weeks. So I think that's also elevating production. But I definitely think you see with Caleb, his ability, his want to in terms of throwing from the pocket, throwing on rhythm, throwing on schedule. And I think this is just a fan's observation. I think it shows you also how good Jayden Daniels has been in that area because it's so crisp and sharp with Jayden. And Caleb, there's still a little bit of like, let me see it. All right, let's throw it. And he's tremendously talented. I think he's going to be a great football player just after watching and seeing him kind of develop. But that's just high-level thoughts on him and the offense.
Yeah, I mean, you see, I think sometimes the supernatural like adaptation that Jayden has made as a 23-year-old, 55 college starts. And then you watch Caleb and you're like, oh, you are not quite as experienced. But at the same time, I think you see some of the reasons that Caleb
uber talented
was, like some of the throws he makes in terms of being able to layer them, get balls up and down. Yep. Like there's a couple touchdowns he throws where you're like, that dude's not open.
Yeah.
I guess he was like just the ability to get the ball up and down into tight spaces and he'll throw with guys in his lap. Like there is a lot of really exceptional high level stuff from him. There's also the crazy Caleb Williams stuff that he's going to hopefully, for his sake, stamp out more and more of year over year in his career. But we're in week 8 of his rookie season, and you can bet your bottom dollar that he'll do something that makes you, scratch your head as to why he did it. And the question is, how much advantage can the Commanders take? of that, and how many times can they force him into that stuff. I think some of the other stuff that's been interesting to watch with their offensive adaptation. One, I know they've leaned in the screen game a little bit more, and he's a very, very good screen thrower because he throws so well off platform. And we've talked about how the timing of screens is so intricate. And so his ability to just catch, bam, get it out there. Like you have to be able to be ready to and able to rally and tackle in a major way on the edge, which is something the Commanders have largely been good at, especially since like week 2-ish. And then I think their running game is they found some things that work. Like DeAndre Swift is a very dangerous back, but I don't know that you'd be like, oh, he's one of the best running backs in the NFL, but he's potent. And I think they've found ways over the last couple of weeks to find more successful runs for him. What makes you nervous, or what are you planning for there on the running side of it before we put it all back together?
Yeah, and he's not. I like the way you said it. He's not the most efficient down-to-down runner. Like he's an explosive back, right? Like so. Yeah. I think what they did this 2 weeks ago, obviously because they had their bye last week against Jacksonville, was they got to some more perimeter runs, more like toss cracks, more outside zone, and more kind of spread runs. And I think the added space was really beneficial for him. And I think you saw kind of how he was maximized. Kind of some stuff that they did with him in Philly, kind of just more perimeter stuff. And we're not going to kind of pound you between the tackles. The backup, actually, Roschon Johnson, has done a really nice job in terms of being like the physical runner. He catches screens well. He's good in pass protection. So they do have kind of a two-headed monster a little bit in the backfield, but Swift is definitely an explosive guy. Like there was a run they had against Jacksonville where it's a toss crack, the receiver cracks the end, they pull the tackle around, and it looks like it's kind of dead in the water, but he's so fast, he's just able to get to the perimeter. So I think when you kind of eliminate some of his needing to read fronts as much, I think he's much more effective. So I think that's what you saw last week. And again, he's explosive. And I think the other thing that needs to be pointed out is they do have so many different offensive playmakers that you're going to be stretched pretty thin here. Like you're not going to be able to just line up, especially when they get in like 11 personnel. You can't just line up and say, hey, we're going to stop the run. And I think they're starting to understand that there in Chicago a little bit better. It's like you're going to get a cover 2 structure. Like that's when you want to run the football. And that's going to be, I think, like when I think about what I would do if I was Joe Witt Jr., like it's a sleepless night a little bit because they have guys that are explosive on the edge, that are really experienced, that are uber talented catching the football. So you got to make sure you kind of take that away. And then I think the secondary reaction is that Swift's going to kill you on the ground, but you kind of got to live with that, especially in a game where, 24 points will probably win it for you.
Yeah, so that was kind of where I wanted to get to next is obviously how then you take all this information, you put it together for your Joe Witt. And this is where, my, hey, let's watch all the touchdowns can come into handy a little bit, because they will put they have done some crazy stuff this year with fake screens and all this kind of stuff. Like they can get real creative, especially when they get in the strike zone. Like they are looking to from like 40 between the 40 and the 30. They're going to empty their bag on trick plays, and they have gotten some that work, like fake toss this way, fake bubble that way. Cole Kmet leaks up the middle. He's wide open. There's some other stuff that's like longer developing, multiple fake play action, and they run 2 guys across, and all of a sudden DJ Moore is wide open as the DBs basically run into each other. And I watch a lot of their big plays, and I think a lot of them are against man-to-man. And that makes sense because Keenan Allen's really freaking good. And DJ Moore is outstanding, as obviously Commanders fans have nightmares about from last year. By the way, why are they wearing the black uniforms again against the Bears? How many times do you want to tempt fate? Maybe
it's a new year, man. Get that juju off.
Yeah, I would say maybe they're just like, hey, let's exercise all these ghosts. But anyway, they're wearing the black uniforms this weekend against the Bears. Point is, DJ Moore last year, yikes, bro. If I'm looking at how, I want to make life hard on Caleb, and I want to invite them to run the football more than I do pass it. Big plays down the field, let Caleb get cooking a little bit. And if I'm Joe, I probably just eat it and play a bunch of cover 2 zone looks and make him make a bunch of decisions and make him stay patient and disciplined, because I don't think that's who he wants to be. I don't think that's who they want to be. And I think that's probably the best way. And especially with the your backup quarterback in the game, if we can lengthen this thing out a little bit, hey, you're going to have to be really precise in the red zone. fewer possessions in the game, even if that means, we bend a little bit more than we want to because we're not quite as aggressive. Like that's kind of, I think, how I would lean, taking all this in. But I'm curious what you think of that and some of the ways that they're able to generate big plays, especially these last couple of weeks, albeit against Jacksonville and Carolina.
Yeah, and I think that it's a really good point. Like, as much as you want to kind of say, oh, we can take everything away, you can't do it. Like, I talked to Dan for a coach's show, which will air on Sunday before the game, and he was just like, as a defensive coordinator, you got to just say, what are the things that we don't want to happen? Let's take those away, and these other things we can't, because we can't take it all away. And I think when you look at Chicago, obviously, like, you want to disrupt Caleb, you want to make him kind of offset him as much as possible. However, I do think they're explosive enough offensively, and he's good enough in the pocket that you say, I'd rather him have to go the length of the field and kind of be methodical and be fastidious and just kind of like slog through the whole thing and eliminate the chunk plays. And we've talked about it before, and that's really hard to do, especially when you got to create a pass rush. And I think Joe Witt Jr. against Carolina had some really good kind of replacement fire zones that worked out. So you end up looking like you're blitzing, but you're still just rushing 4, and they were able to get some free runners. And we'd mentioned the ETs and the TTs with Fowler and Duran. Like, that stuff's excellent, And so you're going to need to lean into that. But I'd say, like, the thing that scares me the most is the playmakers, right? You got to limit them. Obviously DJ Moore over the top or kind of on these deep crossers for the explosive. And so can you be patient? And I think they played a game like that versus Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals, and it ended up paying off for him because the offense was able to supplement. So, however, I don't think Caleb Williams is as good as Joe Burrow. I don't think these playmakers are quite that. They're very, very good, but they're not quite that good. So can you kind of say, hey, you're going to go on a 15-play drive. You got to make, if you can run the football, but you got to make 10 good decisions as a passer, and you can't have any penalties. That feels like the way you want to do this versus a young quarterback. And can you put enough window dressing on it so he doesn't know where to go with the football right away? He has had some games with multiple turnovers this year where he's a little bit confused, a little bit confounded. And, I
think the other thing too, Logan, is he's a little bit impatient.
Do you think so? I mean, there are times where I'm like, he's reading it out well and he's kind of finding the window.
I think,
but you say like he's hunting for a big play. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, like eventually, I feel like it's gotten better, right? And I've got some numbers here that I can back this up with, more than just anecdotally. But like, he eventually is going to want to take his shot. Like, he wants the big play. And that was kind of the thing with college to an extent. Like, a lot of his running around his senior year or his last year at USC was because his offensive line was terrible and he was under instant pressure all the time. It wasn't just that he was big play hunting, but there was some of that on tape, and there was some of that at Oklahoma. And there definitely has been some of that this year. And Williams, this is per Next Gen Stats, Williams has attempted a deep pass attempt on 13.6 of his attempts this season, the 4th highest rate in the NFL.
Oh, wow.
But has completed just 5 of those 27 attempts for 1 touchdown and 4 picks. And then the sub note here, Williams' 26.5 passer rating on deep passes this season is the lowest in the NFL and the lowest by any rookie quarterback since 2018. However, in week 6, Williams attempted a season low 1 pass beyond 20 air yards, resulting in his lone interception on the day. So he has stemmed that a little bit, but I think at times they call a shot and he's like, I'm going to throw the shot. Yeah. And I think sometimes in some of these cover 2s, like you've seen some cover 2 corners get underneath some of the balls down the sideline and pick them off. Like there are ways that, just because he's a rookie and he hasn't seen some stuff yet, or the single high safety, like he trusts that he can make the throw. And it's like, nah, this is the NFL, bro. The dudes are faster on the back end. And you see Andre Cisco for Jacksonville. He's the guy who picked him off in week 6, or, some of the other safeties that have gotten him coming over the top. So I do think that if you make him be really patient, eventually he'll give you an opportunity. Or, like you said, you can draw a penalty or whatever, on this team. But it is risky because it's like, hey, just be quick and give the ball to DJ Moore. Oh boy. Because now all of a sudden the ball's in DJ Moore's hands.
That's really interesting, because like that might actually change my perspective, because it's almost like you want to invite him to take a shot. You want him to invite him to be a little bit aggressive down the field. And like, I don't know, like if you were to play like drop 8 against him and kind of make him be patient, like I think that's what you see there. I'm just trying to think back to some of the interceptions I saw where he's like kind of scrambling around. He just like arm punts it basically down the field.
Definitely, if you can get pressure on it. There's a couple times where he gets pressured, and then it's just like, I got to make a throw. Yeah. And it's like all of the good, patient, like processing, really high level football brain. The second he takes on pressure, just disappears. And he just becomes like, I got to throw the ball guy.
Yeah, I think now you maybe want to go back and watch all those throws again. But like, I do think there is. I think that's really interesting, and I think with a young quarterback, especially the guy with his background at USC and the kind of play style that he had, like you alluded to, I think that's a great point. And the problem is for me is like how would you create enough pressure with a 4-man rush and still encourage him to be patient from a coverage standpoint? I think that's where the paradox lies ultimately for the Commanders is. Like you said, you got to kind of upset him and disrupt his spot a little bit, and like you see kind of like free runners, blitzes, guys with good pass rush, and then he's kind of scrambling around, looking downfield, looking for that shot. But, the Commanders this year, while I think a much improved defense, have had a hard time playing coverage and also winning with 4. Like they've gotten better at it, but can they get that done this week? And that's ultimately the paradox, right? Every single week, like if you're a defensive coordinator, you're like, yeah, that's what I want to do. But the problem is, how do you do that consistently? And so what I would say is be efficient on first down. They do like to run the ball. They're against Carolina and against Jacksonville. Their rush percentage on first down is very high. So maybe you play some version of cover 3 on first down. You get them a 2nd and 10. You're going to get some kind of quick game screen, like we just talked about, bubble choice route by Keenan Allen. Man, they love the choice route to Keenan Allen. Like if he's excellent at it. Yeah, I would love it too, but maybe you get some type of bracket there. He's got to hold the football. You get a pressure there. It's 3rd and 8 because he scrambles for a little bit, and then you got to win on that 3rd down. And I think that maybe is the formula a little bit, is efficient first down and, play that cover 3, get after it, force them to take those play action shots and say, hey, we trust our secondary enough that if they do take a play action shot, we can get our linebackers out underneath some of that stuff. Yeah, maybe that's the formula. At least for a inexperienced defensive mind like myself, that's kind of the direction I would probably go.
I mean, the easy answer, right, is like zone pressures, but like that is incredibly generic, and like how you actually zone that up, who you send, who you drop out, like that is actually something that I'm kind of watching for this week. Jordan McGee being back,
I think that'll be interesting. That'll be really interesting.
Does he wind up playing a lot more than maybe some people think, and that frees Frankie to go up and play on the edge? Like, I did think it was really interesting last week at the podium. Joe Witt, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but also I'm going to say it out loud, but my context is I've stuck a pin in this to watch moving forward. Joe Witt straight up said, I'm not comparing the players, but we want Frankie kind of in that Micah role, like talking about Micah Parsons in Dallas. Well, by the end of their time in Dallas with Joe and Dan, Micah Parsons was a full-time edge. Right. And I kind of wonder if they would prefer Frankie Luvu to essentially be a full-time edge who maybe doesn't always play on the edge, but really, I guess, a full-time defensive lineman, because they'll move him, and obviously did this with Micah, like lining up over a 3 technique or over the center. Like he'll rush from a whole bunch of different places. But they didn't really want Michael Parsons playing in coverage, except for occasionally, like, oh, he's a great athlete. We can drop him out in a zone pressure, and like he's better than a regular old 4-3 defensive end dropping out in a zone pressure look. So that's nice. But if they can get Jordan McGee playing next to Bobby Wagner as an off-ball linebacker, and we'll see if Dorrance is back, but especially with some of the injury stuff that they've had, Javonte Jean-Baptiste obviously down for 4 weeks, et cetera. They've now moved on from Jamin with Jordan McGee coming back. Does Frankie become a more heavy edge usage player? And then that does free you up to hit some of those zone pressure looks and bring Bobby on a blitz and drop Frankie out and, try to confuse Caleb a little bit and give him some junked up looks that have 7 guys on the back end, full coverage, if you will, but also bring in 4 from unexpected places. And I guess that's also probably a good time for you to break down their offensive line and how they would actually handle something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting kind of thought experiment too, because thinking back to training camp, they did kind of use Luvu like that a little bit more, right? They felt more comfortable.
And they used McGee like that a little bit too. It's worth mentioning.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I do think he just gives you some flexibility with some guys that are fast to the football, and McGee, when he was at his best in training camp, was very impressive. And obviously he went through his rookie struggles, but that's a really interesting kind of thought experiment. And you mentioned the offensive line. I think the offensive line man to man is very physically talented. I think they're like a very good group. And like they got Tevin Jenkins, left guard. He was a second round pick a couple years ago. Braxton Jones is kind of that lauded, he's the 5th round guy from Utah, wherever he's from, that's kind of figured it out and become a very efficient left tackle. Matt Pryor is one of the biggest human beings I've ever seen in my life. Like he's just been around the NFL for a long time because he's huge. And then Darnell Wright obviously is the 9th pick overall last year. And, everyone kind of remembers how physically nasty he was and how tremendously athletic he is. And, there are shades of Trent Williams to his game in terms of how he moves around. I do think that some of their kind of offensive line, listening to Chicago media early in the season, it was like, oh, their offensive line's terrible. They can't protect Caleb Williams. Some of that is from Caleb Williams holding the football too long. Like we talked about a little bit how, he needs to see it. He was being a little bit patient. He's trying to play on time. And again, I was really impressed. Let me just make that very clear with how his effort to play on time and play on schedule, really impressed with that. But it just wasn't quite in the timing and in the rhythm. It was close, but it wasn't quite there. And as that's gotten better as the season's gone on, the offensive line production's got better. And so when you look at them, they're all grading in the green, by PFF's metrics. And for those who don't know, that's good. They're a good group. And so I think as they've played together more, as the offense has kind of evolved, as Caleb Williams has played better, that group's played better. And I think they're when I watch them, I'm like, man, they're big, they're physical, they're kind of nasty. And I like the group. I like the group a lot. And again, maybe they're not a top 10 group in the NFL, but they're, to my eye, they're right at that precipice in terms of the razor's edge. So I think that, again, is another thing that I kind of look back in terms of how do you make pressure on this group? Because it's a pretty physically talented, big, strong, athletic group of offensive linemen, and that's going to be kind of challenging.
Yeah, I hope that Dante Fowler's veteran savvy against the young Darnell Wright, because I've seen Wright get beat a couple times this year, and I'm like, oh, come on, Fowler, let's see what you can do. But obviously, Dorrance Armstrong being back could be huge. So we'll see, obviously, as we move towards the week, what the health status of everybody is, but it does look like Dorrance should be able to return this week, and he was playing really, really good football. Last thing I'll just mention here on the way out, we don't need to talk about it, but special teams, keep an eye on that this week. Don't go get a bag of chips on special teams. Wait till the commercial. The Bears have a couple of injuries that, we'll see if guys are up or down, including, by the way, Jaquan Brisker, their outstanding safety.
Oh, is he hurt?
But,
is he nicked?
Yeah, he's got a hamstring thing that he's dealing with, so that would be huge. But I actually, this is a closing point and tease for tomorrow, Logan. I talked to Dan Wiederer of the Take the North podcast, a podcast that takes things. That's what we are. Take Command, Take the North, our Bears podcast in the Odyssey Sports family. And you'll hear that conversation tomorrow, crossover pod here in the feed. But I mentioned special teams because the Commanders have just been playing with their hair on fire on teams. And he's like, man, Chicago's had a couple of struggles in that area this year. And if they have some guys defensively that are out, some of their key core special teamers are going to have bigger roles on defense. And so how does that affect special teams? So special teams could definitely play a role in this game.
Look at you, Craig. Just great insight. Love it.
Hey, I'm trying my best over here.
Because I don't watch a lot of special teams. I don't peek behind the curtain there. But that's good. You talk to somebody else from up there. You got to the inside cheat sheet. That's always good stuff.
I was just like, hey, this is probably worth mentioning. He's like, actually, it's really worth mentioning. I was like, well, I'm glad I mentioned it. Anyway, we're done mentioning things for today. The show is over. So before we say our official goodbye, please hit the subscribe button, whether it's on YouTube. If you made it this far on YouTube, hit the like button. You clearly didn't hate it. So like and subscribe on YouTube, follow on Spotify or subscribe, Apple Podcasts, free Odyssey app, et cetera, et cetera. And then check out Logan on Command Center. Check out, of course, the radio show. We're live from Capital One Arena on Thursday ahead of the Wizards opener. And then we'll have our full preview of Commanders and Bears on the radio tomorrow as well, Friday. So hope everybody enjoyed the show. Thanks for watching and listening. I guess this is the official goodbye. Goodbye. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.